College students, graduates of Reddit, what's the craziest thing you ever witnessed in your dorm residence hall? NSFW. 2 things. Same dude. We had a guy whose room was at the end of the hall, so it had a little extra space next to his door. A little alcove. We had tour groups come through our dorm with prospective students and their families. Well, on one of those days he tore out a bunch of pics from his Playboys and posted them all over his door and on the walls outside his room. He took 3 chairs from the common room and put them outside his room as well. He then had a sign that said the H's and Ho's waiting room. A mother went absolutely ballistic when she saw that. He got in too deep for it too. A few months later, when another tour group came through, our Bill, who was a total asshole, was giving kind of a speech to the high schoolers and their families. So our buddy fell out of his room and just his boxers and his hands tied behind his back with a sock in his mouth. He spit the sock out and started yelling, "Bill, untie me." This isn't funny. Our was humiliated. The parents went absolutely nuts over it. Our buddy was kicked out later that day. One guy peed on a cookie sheet and let it freeze outside in winter. He took said frozen sheet of pee and slid it under another guy's door when he wasn't there. All the rooms in that dorm were carpeted. A guy I knew used to hook up with girls and then throw their clothes into the hall outside his room, then lock them out of his room, making them get dressed in the hall in front of whomever was around. I think he works for Comcast now. Which fits. Boarding school here. MP3. Phones etc. were prohibited. But a few people, including me, still had them. One of them was caught and expelled and all the charging points were covered up. There was one uncovered socket left. But it was 18 feet above ground. And was for a big appliance. The solution we came up with was to steal stuff from the physics lab and make a voltage regulator. Then make 2 stacks of 3 people standing on top of each other. The top 2 guys worked the wires and got us a connection. 1 stack went up every day for almost a week before we were able to get a wire extender with it and get a permanent connection. It is still the craziest, most innovative thing that I have personally witnessed. I lived on the 9th floor of the dorms my freshman year. One wing was males and the other wing females. One of the girls on my floor received a giant 10+ inch black dildo with a suction cup attachment as a gag gift from her friends on her 19th birthday. The guys on my floor thought it would be great fun to periodically steal, then chase each other around with said dildo and beat the living hell out of each other with it. I was in my neighbor's room one day when his dorm mate busted open the door and threw this thing full force at him. Fortunately, my friend was able to react quick enough to dodge out of the way. Unfortunately for us though, the dildo went careening full bore into the window behind him, smashed through it and proceeded to fall 9 stories. We watched in horror and shock as this dildo fell and hit a freshman girl on the head, who immediately collapsed and began convulsing. Cops and paramedics came and took me, my 2 neighbors and the poor girl who owned the dildo down to the campus police station. They put us all into an interrogation room where we waited until a detective came in with the dildo in hand. He then proceeded slam down the suction cup end of the dildo onto the middle of the interrogation table. We all lost our it. We couldn't stop laughing due to the fact that this thing was slowly wobbling back and forth during the whole interrogation. And don't worry, the girl who got conked in the head with this thing was fine in the end. So last winter in Boston there was about 102 of snow over the winter. Being college kids, we proceeded to build an igloo on the roof of our dorm and proceeded to hotbox it. Good times. The slip and slide we had on the ground floor was pretty epic, but probably not as epic as this one girl. For some reason she decided to duck 12 guys on her floor and turn the peephole backwards, reverse peephole Seinfeld style for everyone to see. I'm fairly confident she didn't graduate. A guy that was wasted and tripping balls went into the wrong room in the middle of the night and was thrown out of said room, across the hall and through the wall into my old room. Turns out there had been a giant hole there that was cheaply patched up years ago. Otherwise there should have been no way he could have gone straight through the wall. It was a cold night. but my roommate and I pushed test dresser up to attempt to cover the hole until someone could fix it. Good times. My dorm had a secret Santa thing where your Santa would give you a task to do. And if you completed it, you'd get a gift. In the packed dining hall one night shortly before Christmas break, a huge, hairy, completely naked man jumps onto a table, tucks his junk between his legs, and screams, "Daddy only likes me when I'm a little girl." My roommate was his Santa, and as a reward for completing the task, she gave him a teddy bear wearing overalls. Guy down the hall was just nasty. Smelled bad. Slovenly. But very friendly. He never went to class. You might be thinking gamer. But nope. He was a day trader. Always told us about his wins losses for that day. Anyway. This was before mobile devices. And he hardly ever left his computer as a result. Traded in movements of pennies. So he had milk jugs to pee in. He told us proudly about how much time he saved by peeing in milk jugs. I presumed he dumped them out routinely. But the first time I caught sight of his room I learned the truth. It was as messy as you'd imagine. But then I saw the jugs. All over his room. The floor. Windowsill. Computer desk. My memory is hazy by now. But I'd say he had at least 21-gallon milk jugs full of piss in his room. To be fair, I couldn't verify that they were all actually full or just waiting in reserve. But at a glance at least some of them were clearly topped off. And honestly, how many gallons of piss is really acceptable to keep in your room? A bunch of guys in my hall collected some masks and dangerous looking items, pocket knives mostly. I think someone had a saw for some reason, and pretended to have tied a dude to a chair with a bag over his head, ketchup for fake blood and everything. They spent half the night on chat roulette with a sign that said tits or he dies. They didn't actually get any tits. But people's reactions were pretty great. That and the time one of the engineers dented a wall by firing a custom Nerf gun he'd built down the length of the hall are my only really crazy stories. Walked into the shared kitchen to make an easy mac. Upon entering, I see this drunk chick sitting on the edge of a table with a drunk dude standing in front of her. They were talking. But I was way too focused on getting my easy mac on. So I didn't think much of it. I put my wet mac in the microwave and set it for 1 seconds minute before strolling back to my dorm. Ding. So I roll back to the kitchen to get my mac and sure enough, they're ducking. Her skirt was pulled up. Her pink thong was dangling from one of her ankles. And her legs were wrapped around his waist. Now this guy wasn't thrusting like he is trying to start a fire down there. But based on the sounds this girl was making, he was giving her exactly what she wanted. I did what any sane man would do. I got my mac. Removed the lid. Gave it a good stir and checked for hard noodles. Once the quality control was finished, I casually walked down the hall to my friend's room and told him that someone destroyed all of the furniture in the kitchen. He of course wanted to check it out for himself, so as he was walking to the kitchen, I got ready for a great reaction. As he gets to the door, he turns and looks in and says does nothing. He just stares for a solid 15 seconds. I was starting to think they had stopped. Then he gave the classic what the duck shout and turns with an expression of confusion and satisfaction. My work was done. To this day, that was the most satisfying easy mac I've ever had. TLDR, some dude wet his noodle in the kitchen where I cooked mine. Edit. Thanks kind stranger for my first Reddit gold. I wasn't expecting this much action. I also went ahead and changed the 1 seconds to minutes. So sorry people whose comments will make no sense now. My roommate, a girl who lived across the hall, we will call her Sarah, and myself were sitting in the common room, which is situated right between the two dorm rooms, studying, chatting together. We were talking about place we'd traveled or something when the other girl's roommate comes down the stairs wrapped in a towel, presumably from having taken a shower, and into the common room. As she's walking toward the room, she casually says, "Hey Sarah, I'm going to bed now." Sarah says okay, and continues the conversation she was having with my roommate and I. Her roommate stops in her tracks and repeats, "I'm going to bed now." Sarah gets an embarrassed look on her face, gets up, and silently follows her roommate into the room and shuts the door.